Welcome, dear listeners, to another enchanting tale from TailTalesAudio. We invite you to sit back, relax, and let your imagination wander as we embark on a delightful journey with a lovable terrier named Molly and her devoted family, the Simons. Our story today, Molly's Merry Misadventures, written by Justyn Simon, is set in the charming town of North Albany, where every day brings a new adventure. As the sun rises over this peaceful neighborhood, we find Molly beginning her day. This heartwarming tale is filled with moments of joy, laughter, and the simple yet profound bond between a dog and her human family. So, grab a cozy blanket, perhaps a cup of your favorite beverage, and get ready to dive into a story that will warm your heart and tickle your funny bone. Let's join Molly and the Simons as the first rays of sunlight peek through the curtains. The sun peeked through the curtains as Molly stirred from her slumber. She stretched, her shaggy fur collecting bits of sawdust from the recent renovations. It was time for her morning routine with Sandra and Gary. Padding into the kitchen, Molly found Sandra already at work on her famous spicy pickles. The terrier gave a hopeful whine, and Sandra chuckled, "Not for dogs, Molly. But here's your breakfast." As Molly munched on her kibble, Sebastian the cat slinked into the room. Molly wagged her tail in greeting, but Sebastian merely yawned and curled up in a patch of sunlight. Viola, the other cat, watched the scene from atop the refrigerator, her tail twitching in amusement. Molly's mind wandered to the day the Simons brought her home from the dog pound. She had been huddled in the corner of a noisy kennel, overwhelmed by the barks and whines around her. When Sandra and Gary approached, Molly had cautiously wagged her tail, hope rising in her chest. Sandra had knelt down, offering her hand through the bars. "Oh, Gary, look at those eyes," she'd said softly. Gary had smiled, nodding in agreement. As the shelter worker opened the kennel door, Molly had taken a tentative step forward, then another, until she was in Sandra's arms. "Welcome to the family, Molly," Gary had said, scratching behind her ears. From that moment, surrounded by their warmth and love, Molly knew she was home. After breakfast, it was time for the morning walk. Gary clipped on Molly's leash, and they set out to explore the streets of North Albany. Molly trotted along, tail high, taking in the familiar sights and smells of their neighborhood. Returning home, Molly spotted an Oregon tree frog in the backyard. Her ears perked up, and before Gary could stop her, she was off like a shot. The frog, a master of camouflage and quick hops, led Molly on a merry chase around the yard. Molly leaped and bounded, her stubby legs working overtime, but the frog always remained just out of reach, blending into leaves and grass. Finally, panting and grass-stained, Molly admitted defeat and flopped onto the cool grass, the frog having long disappeared into the foliage. Later that afternoon, Molly's curiosity got the better of her. She snuck into the kitchen where Sandra had left her freshly jarred spicy pickles cooling on the counter. As Molly stretched up to investigate the tantalizing smell, her wagging tail caught the edge of the tablecloth. In a cacophony of shattering glass and startled yelps, the jars tumbled to the floor. Pickles and spicy brine splattered everywhere, creating a pungent, slippery mess. Sandra rushed in to find a very sheepish Molly attempting to lick up the evidence, only to recoil at the spiciness. Then that night, Sandra decided it was bath time. Molly, hearing the telltale sound of running water, tried to make herself scarce. But Gary was too quick, scooping her up and depositing her in the sudsy tub. Molly shook vigorously, sending water and soap suds flying everywhere. By the time the ordeal was over, Sandra and Gary were as soaked as Molly. As evening approached, the Simons settled in to watch TV. Molly, curled up on the floor, accidentally rolled onto the remote. Suddenly, the room was filled with the blaring sound of a car chase movie. Gary jumped, Sandra shrieked, and Sebastian darted under the couch. Molly, startled by her own doing, let out a series of confused barks until Gary managed to find the remote and restore peace. The next day, while Sandra was out shopping and Gary was tinkering in the garage, a delivery person arrived with a package. Molly, ever the vigilant guardian, began barking enthusiastically. The delivery person, not used to such a small but fierce greeter, hesitated at the door. Molly, thinking she had successfully warded off an intruder, pranced around proudly. When Sandra returned to find the package slip and a very pleased Molly, she couldn't help but laugh at the misunderstanding. A few days later, Molly discovered a gap in the fence leading to the Simons' prized vegetable garden. Unable to resist, she squeezed through and found herself in a wonderland of scents and textures. She romped through rows of lettuce, dug enthusiastically around carrot tops, and played a solo game of vegetable soccer with some ripe tomatoes. By the time Gary discovered her, the garden looked like it had been hit by a very localized, very furry tornado. Molly's relationship with the mail carrier was a daily drama. At the sound of the mail truck, she'd race to the window, unleashing a torrent of high-pitched barks. The mail carrier, a good-natured woman named Pat, would always wave, calling out, "Hello, Molly. Keeping everyone safe?" This only encouraged Molly's fervent barking, convinced she was successfully defending her home from this familiar intruder. Sandra brought home a new robotic vacuum cleaner, excited about the help with Molly's endless shedding. When she first turned it on, Molly was baffled by the whirring disc gliding across the floor. She alternated between barking at it and trying to hurt it, much to Sandra's amusement. Eventually, Molly decided the Roomba was her new playmate, following it around and occasionally dropping toys in its path. One crisp morning, Molly's ears perked up at an unfamiliar sound. A steady tap-tap-tap echoed from the old oak tree in the backyard. Curious, she trotted out to investigate. There, clinging to the trunk, was a striking pileated woodpecker, its red crest bobbing as it worked. Molly watched, fascinated, until the bird took flight. She chased after it, barking excitedly, convinced she'd made a new feathered friend to play with. One day, Gary misplaced his reading glasses before an important video call. As he searched frantically, Molly sensed his distress. She began sniffing around, then trotted to Gary's workshop, pawing at a drawer. When Gary opened it, there were his glasses, safe and sound. He'd absent-mindedly left them there while working on a project. Gary praised Molly, marveling at her problem-solving skills. The backyard became a daily battleground between Molly and a particularly bold squirrel. The crafty rodent would taunt Molly from the fence, chattering and flicking its tail. Molly would give chase, but the squirrel always managed to escape at the last second. This game of cat and mouse, or rather, dog and squirrel, became a source of endless entertainment for the Simons, who'd watch from the patio, placing playful bets on whether today would be the day Molly finally caught her nemesis. Winter brought a new adventure when a light snow fell overnight. Molly woke to a world transformed. She cautiously poked her nose out the doggy door, sneezing at the cold flakes. Emboldened, she bounded into the yard, leaping and snapping at the falling snow. She rolled around, leaving dog-shaped impressions, and attempted to dig through the powdery layer, baffled when she couldn't reach the familiar grass beneath. Inspired by Molly's snow day antics, Gary decided it was time to teach her some new tricks. Armed with treats and optimism, he set out to train Molly to roll over. However, Molly had her own ideas. She sat politely, wagged her tail, and even offered a paw, but steadfastly refused to roll. After an hour of demonstrations, coaxing, and treats, Gary finally got Molly to turn over, only to have her immediately pop up and shower him with excited licks. Sandra, watching from the window, couldn't stop laughing at the determined pair. As spring approached, Gary decided to plant a new flower bed, and Molly was determined to help. As Gary dug holes for the plants, Molly enthusiastically dug alongside him, convinced she was part of the gardening team. When Gary turned to get more plants, Molly, proud of her work, proceeded to drop her favorite toys into the newly dug holes, planting them with her nose. Gary returned to find a row of half-buried tennis balls and chew toys where his flowers should have been, with Molly wagging her tail expectantly, waiting for praise for her gardening assistance. One summer evening, Sandra left the porch light on, attracting a flurry of moths. Molly was fascinated, pawing at the window and whining to be let out. When Gary opened the door, she bounded onto the porch, leaping and snapping at the fluttering insects. Suddenly, a large owl swooped down, drawn by the moth buffet. Molly froze, eyes wide, as the owl perched briefly on the porch railing before flying off with its catch. From then on, Molly's nighttime potty breaks always involved a cautious scan of the sky. As autumn settled over North Albany, the Simons' backyard transformed into a colorful playground for Molly. One crisp October morning, she bounded out the doggy door, immediately assaulted by a symphony of new scents and sounds. The maple tree in the corner had shed a carpet of red and gold leaves, which crackled satisfyingly under Molly's paws as she ran through them. Gary was busy raking leaves into piles, and Molly couldn't resist the temptation. As soon as Gary's back was turned, she took a running leap into the nearest pile, sending leaves flying in all directions. Gary turned around to find Molly's head poking out of the scattered heap, her tail wagging furiously, leaves stuck to her shaggy fur. "Molly!" Gary exclaimed, trying to sound stern but failing to hide his amusement. "I just raked those." Unrepentant, Molly shook herself, creating a whirlwind of foliage around her, then darted off to investigate a new smell. She had caught the scent of Sandra's fall baking pumpkin pie cooling on the windowsill. Molly sat beneath the window, nose twitching, giving her best "please drop some food" whine. Later that afternoon, Sandra decided to take Molly for a walk to the local pumpkin patch. The terrier was beside herself with excitement, sniffing every pumpkin they passed. When they reached a pile of gourds, Molly couldn't contain herself. She pounced on a small, bumpy gourd, rolling it around with her nose as if she'd discovered the world's most fascinating toy. As the day wound down and the autumn chill set in, Molly curled up by the fireplace, tuckered out from her fall adventures. Sandra draped a warm blanket over her, and Molly sighed contentedly, dreaming of crunchy leaves and pumpkin-flavored treats. One particularly stormy day, the rain came down in sheets, turning the backyard into a muddy playground. Molly, initially hesitant, soon discovered the joy of splashing through puddles. She raced around, her paws kicking up water, her fur becoming a soaked, muddy mess. When it was time to come in, Sandra groaned at the sight of the mud-covered terrier, realizing too late that she'd forgotten to put a towel by the door. Molly's enthusiastic shake sent water and mud flying everywhere, redecorating the entryway in seconds. Laundry day became Molly's favorite day of the week. As Sandra folded clean clothes on the bed, Molly saw it as an invitation to play. She'd grab socks, racing around the room with them dangling from her mouth. When Sandra tried folding sheets, Molly would dive under them, creating a lumpy, moving landscape. The final straw came when Molly decided Gary's freshly ironed shirt made the perfect napping spot. Sandra couldn't help but laugh, realizing laundry would always take twice as long with their helpful terrier around. One evening, Gary came home looking dejected after a tough day at work. He slumped into his armchair with a heavy sigh. Molly, sensing his mood, approached quietly. She gently placed her head on Gary's knee, looking up at him with her big, understanding eyes. When Gary began to pet her, Molly climbed into his lap despite being a bit too big for it and nuzzled against his chest. As Gary hugged her, scratching behind her ears, his troubles seemed to melt away. Sandra, watching from the doorway, smiled at the special bond between man and dog. One day, Sandra and Gary had to attend a wedding, leaving Molly home alone for the day. At first, Molly was content to nap in her favorite sunny spot, but as the hours ticked by, boredom set in. She decided to explore areas of the house usually off-limits. She nosed through Gary's office, accidentally knocking over a stack of papers. In the guest room, she discovered a forgotten tennis ball under the bed, leading to an impromptu game of solo fetch. In the laundry room, a dangling sock proved too tempting, and soon Molly was engaged in a tug-of-war with the entire clothesline. By the time Sandra and Gary returned home, Molly had redecorated the house in her own unique style. Faced with the chaos and Molly's innocent expression, Gary couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, looks like someone had an adventure today." Sandra sighed, surveying the damage, but then smiled as Molly wagged her tail hopefully. "What are we going to do with you, Molly?" Molly just cocked her head, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Another day in the Simon household had come to an end, and despite the mess, it was clear that this little terrier had firmly cemented her place in their hearts. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this delightful journey through Molly's Merry Misadventures. We hope you enjoyed the laughter, love, and loyalty that filled the Simons' home. Molly's antics and the bond she shares with Sandra and Gary remind us all of the joy and companionship that our furry friends bring into our lives. At TailTalesAudio, we are dedicated to bringing you stories that celebrate the special connections between humans and their canine companions. Each tale is a testament to the unique adventures, challenges, and heartwarming moments that come with sharing our lives with dogs. Stay tuned for more heartwarming tales from TailTalesAudio, where every story celebrates the special bond between humans and their canine companions. Remember to cherish your furry friends and the joy they bring to your everyday life. Until next time, may your days be filled with wagging tails, warm snuggles, and endless adventures.